Good evening, Sangha sisters and brothers. It's wonderful to see you all. Tonight we'll have sort of our usual format. We'll have a seated meditation followed by a walking meditation and then a second sit. And then I will share with you some of my thoughts on the subject of right action. So I very much look forward to sharing with you and to hearing what your thoughts are also on the subject. So let's settle into our seats. I think everyone here knows the way. So just settle in. Try to think of putting away all of the noise of the day and see if you can move into the stillness, move into the quiet, and find the peacefulness of this present, really lovely moment when we can be together. Coming back now to your chair and being present in the room, we'll do our walking meditation. I know that our usual instructions are to take one step on the inhale and one step on the exhale. And I found that I do a little variation. I'm sure that that's fine. I like taking long, slow, deep breaths. And, you know, we're told that those long, deep breaths are what help to relax, help to stimulate the part of our system that lets us really relax. So for me, the best rhythm is a long exhale, step left, step right, and a long exhale, step left, step right. So I do 2 steps and try to coordinate it with my breath. So you might want to try that. The trick is to keep your focus on breathing and walking in sync. And then to add to the challenge, I sometimes put onto the steps a thought such as, I am here, I am grateful. I am here, I am grateful. So you can do some variation like that that might work for you. So we'll do our walking meditation. And when you hear the bell, we rise, and then the second bell, we honor each other, begin walking on the third bell. You know the drill. Come back on the fourth bell. All right, so here we go. So we'll enjoy our second sit now. Greetings again. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, bear with me. I'm trying to make my little talk appear on my screen. Okay. I think it's really pretty remarkable that we can be far apart sitting in our little separate Zoom squares, and we can be completely still and silent and yet generate a real feeling of warmth and just a sense of togetherness at our Sangha gatherings. Well, it's a privilege to be able to share with you my thoughts on right action, one branch of the Eightfold Path. I do feel like I benefit a great deal from immersing myself in the topic, whatever the topic is I'm going to share. I end up reading about it and thinking about it, meditating on it, and just generally carry it around with me for days. So, right action. Maybe a good way to introduce this topic is a quote from from Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, quote, "The basis of right action is to do everything in mindfulness." Now, I mentioned last week that Janaki's talk about right concentration was a great lead in to right action. If you recall, the symbolic wheel that we see before our formal sitting shows up on Heather's screen. It has 8 spokes that represent the Eightfold Path. And we're reminded that they aren't exactly steps. That is, they aren't to be thought of as done in any particular order or any sequence, even though sometimes you'll see them given as a list of 1, 2, 3, 4. But rather, these 8 spokes of the wheel are reinforcing aspects of each other. So the idea is for us students of Buddhism to try to develop these qualities simultaneously. So right concentration and right mindfulness reinforce right action. Another way to talk about this might seem obvious, namely that our outward behavior, our actions, spring directly from our inner insights. Remember the suggested formula: concentration plus mindfulness leads to insight. Maybe it's also true that insight leads to joy and to right action. Right action. In the Pali language, sama kamanta. Well, I do love the study of words, so naturally I had to see what the scholars had to say about the word, which appears in the Buddhist texts as sama, and which is often translated right, with each of the aspects of the Eightfold Path. Well, no surprise, there's some disagreement about the best way to translate sama. One possible translation is very best. So, very best speech, very best action, etc. The word carries the idea of wise and wholesome. Imagine a sailboat in a storm, and in spite of all the efforts of the trusty crew, the boat tips over and the Coast Guard is called, and finally all the passengers and crew are safe, and the Coast Guard decides to right the boat. right, as in set straight. But what almost all the scholars seem to agree on is that the 8 samas of the Eightfold Path are not rules. They are not laws or commandments like the biblical 10 commandments. So it's not right, the opposite of wrong, with the heavy, the heavy overlay of some moral judgment. Instead, we can think about the 8 samas as descriptions of a completed, enlightened person. So, what guidance does the Buddha give us for right action? The ancient texts offer something known as the precepts. Again, these aren't commandments. They're more like a doctor's prescription. It's like hearing your doctor say you want a healthy life. Well, good health generally results from eating lots of veggies and getting a good night's sleep and exercising regularly. And by the way, don't worry, be happy. So the Buddha says you want a life that minimizes suffering and increases joy. Here's the formula in the form of precepts. And again, there are different branches of Buddhism that focus on 4 or 5 or more, but the ones that seem pretty universal are these 5. Avoiding killing, avoiding stealing, avoiding lying, avoiding the misuse of sex, avoiding intoxicants. I personally think the Buddha had a very profound understanding of human nature to set forth these precepts as restraints, things to avoid. Because in some ways, I think restraining from habitual unwholesome behaviors can be more challenging. Have you ever identified some of your own habitual behaviors that seem unwholesome or even, unhealthy, and then you tried to restrain or resist? Well, I read these 5 precepts and I thought, hey, I don't kill or steal or lie or abuse sex or use drugs. Home free, right? Great, I'm good. Not so fast, Jane. Number 1, not killing. Well, maybe I do eat meat. Is that so bad? Shoot, do I have to be a vegan to practice Buddhism? And aren't plants living beings? And what about killing a suffering animal? Is that okay? And what about defending your family if it's threatened? Do I have to be a total pacifist to be a Buddhist? And those moths that emerged from the old sack of flour in my pantry, didn't I swat them without a thought? And isn't killing exactly what the animal kingdom does? So it must be natural. Jane rationalizes well. Not stealing. I wouldn't take something that isn't mine. Last week, when I returned my cart to the Costco parking lot collection area, I saw a package of 3 little Boursin cheeses, neatly wrapped, that someone had accidentally left in their returned cart. There was no one around. I had an ethical decision to make. Should I take it? Folks, I took it home. Rationalizing began. They won't realize they're missing it till they get home, and by then someone else will have taken it. And blah, 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 just justifying. Fact is, I took something that wasn't mine. It's interesting to note that my conscience nagged at me. A sure sign that I probably made a poor choice. By this time, I began to realize that if I look deeply into my own heart, I see that these precepts are not so simple. I started thinking, gee, they are all stated so negatively. Avoid this and avoid that. Then I remembered Thich Nhat Hanh has given us positive ways to look at these ethical guidelines. The 5 mindfulness trainings. They are clear, carefully worded guidelines for right action, and they all begin with aware of, in other words, mindful of. So, if I may, I'd like to offer partial versions of some of the mindfulness trainings with apologies to Ty. Number 1, reverence for life. Quote, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. End quote. When rereading this, I realized that the action of refraining from killing springs from an open-hearted sense of interconnectedness. The practice is to cultivate insight and wisdom. I don't need to become a vegan, but I do need to polish the mirror of my heart, and right action will naturally flow forth. Number 2, true happiness. Quote, aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. I'm determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion. End quote. Again, the right action springs from an awareness of our interconnectedness and a sense of compassion. I observe also that Ty goes beyond, quote, avoiding stealing, quote, and encourages us to cultivate generosity. How might we cultivate generosity of spirit? By practicing it, by acting generously. To rid ourselves of the unwholesome tendencies that might lead to stealing, such as hoarding or greed or envy, we cultivate the more wholesome traits, watering seeds of kindness, Thich Nhat Hanh would say. Sri Swami Satchidananda suggests a similar metaphor. He says, what's the best way to deal with a bucket of dirty water? Keep on continuously adding clean water. Eventually, you have a bucket full of clean water. And so, Ty continues to offer his version of the precepts that define the ethical actions of an enlightened being. Number 3, true love. Number 4, loving speech and deep listening. Number 5, nourishment and healing. Perhaps soon we can, as a Sangha, we can review all of the complete mindfulness trainings to experience the full force of their wisdom again. In each case, the 5 mindfulness trainings point to cultivating the positive inner work that naturally leads to right action. The foundation is what I'd call an open heart, an expansive spirit with mindfulness of our interbeing and with loving kindness and compassion for others and for the earth. I'd like to end with a few quotes about action. Mother Teresa, love begins at home, and it is not how much we do, but how much love we put into that action. Arthur Schopenhauer, in action, a great heart is the chief qualification. Aristotle, it is easy to perform a good action, but not easy to acquire a settled habit of performing such actions. And here's what Thomas Jefferson says. Do you want to know who you are? Don't ask, act. Action will delineate and define you. And last, well, next to last, Thich Nhat Hanh, right action is the action of touching love and preventing harm. And final quote also by Thich Nhat Hanh. Each thought, each action in the sunlight of awareness becomes sacred. Well, thank you for your attention. And my hope is that the wisdom of the Dharma may guide us all to practice mindfulness and to commit to right action. And now I'd be delighted if you folks would take a moment to share some of your observations on this subject. So we'll open it up for sharing. Turn off the recording.